Hello folks, welcome to Ontario on January 1st of 2025. Happy New Year to everyone. And as you can no doubt tell, there's been quite a difference in weather between a week ago when I moved this out here in front of the shop to today. We had a really warm November, and in December the temperatures dipped to seasonable lows and we got wonderful covering of snow. We had a beautiful white Christmas and things were looking good to go to the bush and work. And then this past week, the temperature rose, and in one night alone, we got over 1.5 inches of rain. So the result is, we really don't have much snow left here, and the top of the ground is a little mushy. The good news is the temperatures are supposed to plummet somewhere back to normal or even below normal in the next couple of days. Well, what a great time to do some work on our winch here. When I pulled this out here, I was thinking, when did I build that? And you know, it's got to be 26, 27 years ago that I built this unit, and I really have had to do nothing to it since. And when I built it, I used pieces of this and that I had here on the farm or that I was able to scrounge or was given from friends and family. And the result is these fair lead rollers turned out to be a little soft. When I made them, I put in 1-inch shaft, I drilled it, tapped it, put a grease fitting in it so it has a grease port. But unfortunately, the only stock I had that I could put over top of that 1-inch shaft was 1-inch black iron Schedule 40 pipe. And we all know how soft that is. And as you can no doubt see here, this cable here has worn through both sides. So it's time to make up something new. So I'm going to remove the 2 shafts, take off the rollers, and then I'm going to see what I have in stock, and we'll machine a couple new rollers. And if all goes well, I'm even going to harden them. You know, it's a nice day to be in the shop. We've got low cloud cover outside, the winds come up, it's spitting rain, the temperature's hovering around freezing. I've got a nice fire on in the wood furnace, the fan's blowing. It sure is comfortable in the shop. Well, these are our 2 shafts we took out, and of course our 2 rollers, and here's the one that's worn all the way through. I'm not going to change much, I'm not going to change anything in the length on the rollers. They're 6.5 inches long. The ID is about 50 thou bigger than the OD of the shaft, so I might tighten that up a little bit, but we need some clearance there for a good film of grease. What I am going to do, after some measuring on the winch, I have quite a bit of clearance between the roller here and the back of where it mounts. I'm going to boost these up to 1.5 inches in outside diameter. That'll give a little more surface area, larger circumference to the circle, and a little more surface area for that cable to ride against. I went looking in my odds and sods boxes, and although I did find the remnants, one bolt that I had from years ago, I took off an old excavator that was scrapped. It was a counterweight bolt that was big enough, but it's not long enough to make 2. However, I did find this piece of hex stock. So out of this piece of hex stock, I'm going to turn 2 new rollers. Let's chuck this in the lathe and see what it cuts like. Well, as an old friend of mine used to say, after a lot of chewing and a cutting, we've transformed this from a piece of hex stock into a piece of round stock. Let's see what diameter we're at. So about 1,950. We're going to take it down to 1.5, so we've got about 450 thou to take off. But it's lunchtime, and I'm going to go inside and have a snack. Obviously my wife's not home. You gotta love carbide cutting tools. My father used to marvel at them. His generation did a lot of work with high-speed steel, and Stella actually as well. He thought that was an amazing product. Well, this little carbide cutting tool, I did break the tip twice when I was setting up my first cut. I got a little too greedy when I was trying to take off the hexagonal points on the material. This same cutting tool has done 95% of the work. Look at the temperature of those little 66 and 99 cutting tools coming out. Oh my goodness, that's an amazing product. Well, it's nice and warm in the shop. Got a cup of tea on the go. I couldn't think of a much nicer way to spend a January afternoon. There we go. That's our final cut finished. Our OD is to size. I'm going to part it here. Then we'll take out the hex piece out of the chuck. We'll rechuck this piece in, and then we'll bore out the pin bore. That's a little warm. There we go. We'll take this piece of hex stock out. We'll rechuck our roller, and then we'll drill out the hole for the pin bore in its center. Now we're ready to drill some holes. Have you ever had one of those days that doesn't just go quite as planned? And at the time you think, oh, you've got to be kidding me. Why did this have to happen? And it turns out it had a bit of a silver lining, but you didn't see it right away. I had one of those days yesterday. Started off, it was a raw, nasty morning. I came out here, lit a fire in the wood furnace. Oh, it was so nice. Had a coffee. Went over to my candy jar, which is restocked after all the Christmas gifts I received. And on my first bite, I pulled a crown off, and that piece, the post that the crown was mounted on, was a little tender to say the least. So I phoned the dental office, and no, they couldn't see me. Our regular dentist wasn't in this week, but they had Dr. So-and-so. He's relatively new, and I could see him this morning at 8:40. So in I went to the dentist, Met this young fellow, and he was a great young man. Pleased to meet him, had a great conversation, and he was all excited. He just bought his first house. Now he's from the city, and he asked me, he said, "Do you have propane?" I said, "Well, we do, but our major heat source is actually our wood stove. We burn firewood." And he thought that was a great idea because he just moved into his new house yesterday, and last night he ran out of propane. They hadn't filled the tanks. So we had a great conversation. I welcomed him to the community, and his assistant, the young lady that was helping him, this was really neat too. Actually, I knew his father, and they lived just a few country miles away in that direction. So I got to meet two nice people yesterday, kind of a silver lining to that cloud. And then everything was going well. I'd machined all the OD. I was working on the ID, and I was up to a 7/8 hole. I just chucked the 7/8 bit. I was about to start cutting that hole, turned the lathe on, and the breaker tripped. That's odd. Reset it, made sure the clutch wasn't engaged, it was in neutral. Yep. Tried it again, oh, and it tripped again. So I did exchange that breaker in case it was faulty with another one, and it's actually a 240. And you know what? I did it again. So obviously there's something wrong. So I disconnected the power, and I went over here, and if you could see earlier in the video, behind here was all sorts of big sheets of cardboard that I seemed to hoard. Sheet goods, plywood, and then all sorts of lumber. So I moved all the lumber, moved all the sheet goods, and I discovered I have far too many pieces of cardboard put away for it. You never know when I might need it. And obviously a few of them have gone up in the chimney this morning, or this afternoon. Well, I did get the covers off the lathe. I looked in there. There was a massive mouse nest. Now, I didn't take a picture. I cleaned it out, and all the oil and grease that had leaked down this lathe is well over 50 years old. It was the worst fire hazard you could ever imagine. So I cleaned all that out, and right now the reason I'm wearing coveralls is I'm in the process of removing the motor, and I'm going to send it out and have it rebuilt. But you know what? The silver lining on that was, A, I found out I'm a cardboard hoarder, and B, I got to remove a significant fire hazard that was underneath this lathe all this time. So I guess bad things happen, and unfortunately we never know when something good is going to come out of it. Well, I better get back to work and get this motor pulled. Well, last night I cleaned out the top end of the lathe, the gears, the drive mechanism, the clutch, got rid of all the old grease and oil and all the mouse residue on the bottom, and then I wiped it all out with solvent, so it's all ready to go back together. I wiped down the motor, and as you saw, I was blowing it out and poking in with wires, and I was retrieving all sorts of mouse nest material and corn and even some sunflower seeds, and our bird feeder's probably got to be 50-60 yards that way. I think the right thing to do is take this motor apart just to be sure. Oh, look at that. More mouse nest material. Oh my goodness. All sorts of it here. I wonder what that's going to look like inside, and to think that I've already taken handfuls out, literally. Wow. How often does one get that lucky? A little dirty in there. Wow! Well, I'm sure glad we're taking this apart. That's gotta be a fire hazard. Right over top of the capacitors. Oh, it's amazing it didn't catch fire. I'm having a bit of a challenge pulling the shaft and the bearing out of the end housing here, and I don't want to damage anything. This motor is really old. If I remember correctly, I got this motor from my father, and he had it on an old hammer mill. It's a 3-horse 220 volt motor. Actually, you could wire it 120. You'll have a full load amperage of 34 amps. I'm hoping I can press that bearing out with grease. Let's see how it works. Here we go. That was fantastic. Oh my goodness, what a mess in there. Well, now that we've got it apart, I'm going to wash it all off with solvent, blow it off, clean it up, and then we'll start putting things back together. Well, once again, we've had a cloud cross our paths, change our plans, but ultimately it has a silver lining. All this work here started when I was machining new fairlead rollers for our winch, and the lathe started tripping the breaker. So I took it all apart, and I found all sorts of old grease and oil underneath, and a mouse nest, which I'm sure glad to have gotten that out of there in case a hot chip ever landed on it. And then I took the electric motor apart, and you saw the mouse nest that was in there, and it of course was soaked with oil and grease from years of use. I was really happy to find that, because that definitely was a fire waiting to happen. And I think I found the root cause of all the problems. This bearing on the armature here spins nice and free, feels like it's got lots of lube left in it, but this little one on this end where the mouse nest was, wow, it's tight. It even growls a little when I spin it, so I think that was the root cause of everything. So I'm going to replace both armature bearings while I've got the motor apart. We're all cleaned up, so once I get these bearings I'll come back out and put old Betsy back together and install it on the lathe and hopefully finish off those fairlead rollers. Now I just need to record these numbers and order some parts. There we go. This magnifying glass with a little light on it used to belong to my father. And I used to tease my father about being old and not being able to see and needing a magnifying glass to read part numbers. We should be careful what we say.